That old geezer George is a total loser. I bet you're no better since he recommended you. I felt utter contempt for my boss, Brandon, who even ridiculed George, a long-serving and respected employee, turning him into a joke. I glared at Brandon's smirking face. What's with that defiant attitude? Well, whatever. Let's see how long you last. I will fire useless trash subordinates like you in a flash. In response to Brandon's irrational anger, I coldly retorted. Subordinate? Who said I was your subordinate? After that, I explained the real reason I came here, and Brandon's smug grin vanished, his face turning pale. My name is David. Although I'm still quite inexperienced, I'd like to share various lessons I've learned throughout my life. Born into a family of chefs who owned a restaurant, I grew up thinking that providing delicious meals for customers was what adults do. My dad was a chef specializing in Western cuisine, and my mom was a pastry chef. The restaurant they ran was a hidden gem locally known, with many fervent fans and repeat customers. Influenced by my parents, I developed a deep interest in cooking from an early age. I naturally came to think about becoming a skilled chef like my parents and eventually taking over the family restaurant. Looking back, my childhood up to my elementary school years was incredibly happy. I wasn't taken on fancy trips or to theme parks, but I was raised without hardships, surrounded by my parents' love and delicious food. I grew up fully content and entered middle school. In middle school, I joined the soccer team, and my parents always looked forward to watching my games, until one day. When I came home after soccer practice, I found my house on fire. Our house had the restaurant on the first floor and our living space on the second floor. Fire trucks were already there, and firefighters were actively trying to extinguish the flames, but the fire was too intense. And it wouldn't subside. My parents were carried out unconscious by the rescue team and rushed to the hospital, but it was too late to revive them. Unbelievably, both of my parents had left me behind and passed away abruptly. That day, I lost everything dear to me all at once. My beloved parents, our treasured restaurant, my cherished home. All were taken away by the fire. As a middle schooler, I was left with a profound sense of loss, utterly alone in the world. I had no relatives willing to take in an orphan child like me. What am I supposed to do now? Lost in despair, my middle school teacher, Mr. Carter, who kept me in his house temporarily, suggested a kind of orphanage where I could stay. Just as I was resigning myself to move to the facility, a middle-aged man visited Mr. Carter's house to see me. He introduced himself as George Parker. I was a regular customer at your parents' restaurant, not just as a patron but as a friend of your father for many years. This tragedy is deeply shocking and saddening for me too, as I've lost dear friends. I've been concerned about you, David. This regular customer named George seemed to have had a long-standing friendship with my father. Feeling completely desolate and alone, his presence was incredibly reassuring to me. It was as if George sensed the nuances of my distressed state as he continued speaking. David, I've known you since you were a toddler. I can't think of you as a stranger. What are you planning to do now? You can't stay here at Mr. Carter's forever, right? I honestly shared my situation. Yes, I was planning to officially move into a facility. George nodded slowly and then offered. If you're okay with it, why don't you come live with me? My wife passed away a few years ago, and we don't have any children. So there's plenty of room. Don't be shy, think of it as your own home. I gratefully accepted George's kind offer. From that day, I was taken in by George and raised as if I were his own. In the Parker household, I was given my own room and continued to attend middle school as before. George, in his mid-60s, had worked for a major food manufacturer for many years. George became a regular at my parents' restaurant initially because of his dedication to his work. He had been involved for many years in developing retort packaged foods, like hamburgers and other processed meat products. Whenever he heard of a good restaurant, he made it a point to visit and taste the food personally. His relentless effort led to the creation of many smash-hit products under his supervision. This is how he initially started visiting my parents' restaurant, eventually becoming close friends with them. Your father and I made a promise when he was still alive. Eventually, it became a shared dream between your parents and me. One day, George told me. Curious, I asked him what it was, and his answer intrigued me. It's about your father's exquisite hamburgers from the restaurant. We plan to fully commercialize them and launch them through my company. We wanted to let people across America, no, around the world, taste those delicious hamburgers. Among all the dishes my father made, the hamburgers were especially popular and highly praised. George lamented that he had promised to commercialize them, but unfortunately, my parents passed away before it could happen. Though George had witnessed my father making the hamburgers on several occasions, the recipe wasn't documented due to its proprietary nature. Additionally, all the collections of cooking ideas and other recipes had been lost in the fire. Hearing this, I felt compelled to help George. From a young age, I grew up watching my parents prepare and cook. I think I can remember how to make those hamburgers even without the recipe. More importantly, I ate them almost every day, and my taste buds remember the flavor. If it means preserving my parents' legacy and sharing their delicious food with more people, I'd like to help realize your dream. If you don't mind. I offered to help make his dream come true. Above all, it seemed like a necessary step for me to reflect on my precious memories with my parents and to keep looking forward in life. After that, I spent days and nights relying solely on my memory to recreate my parents' recipes. But it wasn't easy. Recreating the flavors that my parents had painstakingly developed proved to be a challenging journey, and success was hard to come by. George, whose project had once seemed doomed after my parents' death, was invigorated once again when it was revived. He moved the commercialization project forward within the company. However, just as the project was about to come to fruition, George was unexpectedly removed from his role. He was betrayed by another employee who took over as the project head. Facing such treachery and unethical behavior within the company, George suffered great mental anguish and became physically and emotionally exhausted. Concerned about him being disheartened, I decided to dedicate all my free time to recreating the hamburger recipe while attending a correspondence high school. George strongly advised me to follow a normal path through high school and college, but I didn't want to burden him further. Moreover, I felt I couldn't move forward in life unless I recreated my parents' flavor and fulfilled his dream. And finally, I succeeded in perfectly recreating the taste of the hamburgers from my parents' restaurant. And George managed to reach the point of commercialization. However, George was nearing retirement and couldn't be present at the company during the product's launch. I blamed myself, wondering why I hadn't recreated the recipe sooner. If only I had been a little quicker, I could have made his dream come true while he was still there. I sincerely apologized to him. Despite being a stranger, you took in an orphan like me and took care of me. I'm deeply grateful to you, George. I thought I could finally repay you by working on this recipe. I'm sorry, I just missed making your dream come true. To this, he simply smiled warmly and said, "Thank you for sharing this dream with me. I had a lot of fun and was happy just doing that. It's not your fault we didn't make it in time. You should focus on achieving your own dreams now. It's your turn to make them come true." He comforted me kindly and encouraged me to pursue my future. While attending the correspondence high school, I thought seriously about my future. And I decided on my path. It was to work at the major food company where he had dedicated many years. During the 4 years I studied at the correspondence high school, I had interacted with this company through him on several projects. Although it was a large corporation, it did not adhere to the modern standard of hiring only college graduates. They still reserved some positions for high school graduates. Thanks to his referral, I was granted an interview and successfully received a job offer. I was assigned to the product development department. Since I had already been participating in some projects with this section during my high school years, it was decided I would join them. Truth be told, my hiring and assignment were part of a major internal reform initiative at the company. But this was unknown to the staff below the board level. Assigned to the product development department, I made rounds to introduce myself to all the sections under its jurisdiction on my first day at the company. When I visited the product planning section, where George had worked until his retirement, I met the section manager, Brandon. He appeared to be in his late 40s. He was well dressed in a neat, stylish suit, but there was a hint of malice in his eyes as he looked at me. He sneered disdainfully as he received my greeting with a smirk, looking down on me. Unperturbed, I said to him, "I look forward to working with you." "Looking forward to it, huh?" I don't think there'll be much interaction between us. You're just a high school graduate, aren't you? How did someone like you get into a big company like this? What kind of connections did you use to get in? Though he looked fresh and professional, once he opened his mouth, all he did was belittle and mock me. I was convinced that people who feel the need to belittle others to feel superior are the most petty. So, I felt nothing but pity and contempt for him and remained silent. As I stayed quiet, he pressed on. People like you, with your low education, don't belong in this company. You're out of your league. I heard you got in because of that old man George who retired last year. He was demoted to a regular staff position after I took over his managerial role. Did you know that? If someone as incompetent as him recommended you, you must be pretty mediocre too. Brandon mocked and insulted George, a long-serving and respected employee. Annoyed by his disrespect towards George, I glared at Brandon. Then, Brandon snapped back in frustration. What? What's with that attitude? Do you think such behavior is acceptable on your first day? You're just a high school grad, stupid. And utterly uncooperative. You're done. Well, whatever. Let's see how long you last. I make it a point to quickly fire useless trash subordinates like you. I thought it was about time. Looking coldly into the eyes of the irate and creepy Brandon, I declared. Subordinate? When did I ever say I was your subordinate? Brandon, utterly condescending, scoffed in response. So the new guy is even less than a subordinate. Let me correct that to the bottom of the barrel. I refused to engage further in his nonsense. For my part, I must decline having a subordinate who embodies human trash like you. I hope you resign soon, I retorted. Hearing my comeback, his face went blank for a moment, but then his expression turned into one of suspicion. What are you talking about? You're a new employee assigned today, and moreover, hired right out of high school. If you mean you're not assigned to the elite product planning section, I understand, but why would I be your subordinate? It was time to explain why I had come to greet him today. I have been appointed as the new head of the product development department as of today. Therefore, all the sections under it, including the product planning section which you manage, are under my supervision. That makes you my subordinate, I explained. Upon hearing this, his face turned ashen. Before George retired, I had been frequently visiting the company to finalize and perfect the recipe he had successfully pioneered for commercialization. I was aware of the cunning and dirty tactics Brandon had used to steal George's achievements and position himself as the project leader. The product I designed under George's initiative had already been adopted as a prototype in the menus of first-class meals on airlines and in luxury hotels. As a result, it had received high acclaim and had been a great success. Due to this popularity, there were already people traveling from afar to dine at this luxury hotel just for our hamburgers. Recognizing these achievements, the president and the board of directors had put forward a major personnel reform initiative. Although this food manufacturer had a long history, it had recently been outmaneuvered by competitors in terms of planning capabilities, causing the management team much concern. There had also been intense pressure from shareholders at the annual general meeting. The bold idea was to recruit young, talented outsiders like me for executive positions right from the start, valued for the generic application of the hamburger recipe. I was the first to be appointed under this plan as head of the product development department. Of course, I made sure to report George's efforts and achievements in developing the recipe to the board. Until today, Brandon had been put in the dark. The sneer he had worn until a moment ago vanished, and standing before me, he looked stunned and pale as I delivered my final ultimatum. Brandon, your luck runs out today. Stealing George's achievements to advance your own career is despicable and unacceptable. Have some shame. You will soon receive a notice of your dismissal from the board of directors. He began to tremble and collapsed to his knees. As I had warned, a board meeting was convened soon after to discuss his fate. His deceitful actions, such as removing George from the hamburger commercialization project and claiming the achievements as his own, as well as his history of unjustly taking credit for the work of subordinates and colleagues, were brought up for review. Furthermore, his habitual harassment, verbal abuse, and bullying of subordinates came to light. leading to a unanimous decision for his dismissal without any consideration for leniency. He was fired and expelled from the company. My first major task as head of the product development department was to complete George's project. That is, to commercially produce and distribute the exact retort packaged hamburgers from my late parents' restaurant. Although the prototype had been a big success in first-class meals and at luxury hotel restaurants, the reaction from the general public was an unknown factor. George and I had our concerns, but they turned out to be unnecessary worries. Once commercialized and released to the public, my parents' restaurant's hamburgers quickly became a hugely popular product, leading to an increase in production. In no time, it became a best-selling mega-hit. George and my parents' long-held dream had finally been realized. On the anniversary of my parents' passing, I invited George to a dinner at the first-class hotel where he first achieved great success with his project. We indulged in many delicious dishes and fine wines. But the highlight was the hamburger from my parents' restaurant that he had produced. It was exceptionally tasty. It seems that this hamburger will soon be adopted in luxury hotels in New York and Paris as well. It's really a testament to your long-standing dream and passion, I said while enjoying a bite of the hamburger. George responded, No, it's all thanks to you for understanding and embodying our dream. The company has gained a great asset. With a rare talent like you, I'm sure you'll continue to fulfill the dreams of many more people. He praised me warmly. Despite the many challenges and hardships I faced, I felt for the first time that it was all worth it. Reflecting on it, I realized that none of this would have started without the hamburger recipe my parents left behind. It was a profound thought. Everything had begun from there. As George and I reminisced about my parents, tears mixed with our conversation. But I felt an increasing sense of motivation and responsibility for the future.